Well, I got a phone call around 1 o'clock today from Randy saying, I hate to do this to you, and then he hacked up a lung, and he said, well, I thought I was going to be okay, and he started hacking up again, and I just knew it. There's just no way that he could make it. And today was one of those days, you know, Reese was supposed to fly out to Nashville today to go to Impact for counselor training. I was going to follow him on Friday with John Michael, and the youth group's coming Monday. Well, Reese's flight got delayed from 1 to 5, and then they moved it back to 3, so we got ready to go to the airport, and they canceled it altogether. And then I tried to find another flight, and there's not one until tomorrow night, and so I said, forget it. And so he'll go with me on Friday. So in the midst of all that, rain called me, and it was just one of those days, right? And not to mention the rain. It's been quite a few days, yeah? My understanding is that we received somewhere around 6 inches of rain, I think, between yesterday and today. You know it's been raining a lot, at least here, when the south pond overtakes the out parcel, right? It becomes one long football field of water. Even more when the two ponds become one, which is slowly occurring. So, I had 4 hours. Like, what are we going to talk about? Well, let's talk about storms. So we're going to talk about storms tonight for a little while. And our text is going to be found in Mark chapter 4. If you have your Bibles, you can use the Bibles that you've got. This is from the English Standard Version, and so we'll read fully through it one time as we begin. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. And leading the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep, on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. He said to them, Why are you so afraid? Is still no faith? And they were filled with great fear, and said to one another, Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Well, last week began the 5-month stretch known around these parts as hurricane season. In November of 2005, when I came to interview here, I had done my research on hurricanes just one summer before, in 2004. Y'all had hurricanes Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean. It was the first time that 4 tropical cyclones had produced hurricane-force winds in one state during a season since 1886. And I told a few people before coming down, I said, you've got to be a crazy person to move to Southwest Florida. You know? Well, man plans his course, as the Bible says, but the Lord determines the steps. And so, not long after that, I wound up down here in Southwest Florida. And for the next 12 years, we didn't sniff a hurricane. One year, I remember going to Steve Caldwell's house to wait out a tropical storm, my first ever tropical storm. And I'm telling you, it hardly even rained. And the wind, I don't even know if it blew at all. It was pathetic. It was nothing compared to even this. It didn't rain this much. It didn't wind. It wasn't as windy as it was, at least yesterday. It was pathetic. Then Irma came. Irma came, I want to say 16 or 17. 17? Yeah, then Irma came. And, Irma was a storm. And I thought that was a big deal. And then Ian did. And I found out what a big deal it was, right? All I've heard from meteorologists, from weather experts, which is, right, an oxymoron, all I've heard from weather experts for the last few months is how bad this hurricane season is going to be. Right? And because they're all telling us how bad it's going to be, I just don't think it's going to be that bad. Angela took this picture a few years ago when the best and the brightest among us were stocking up for gasoline Armageddon. I was half afraid to use this picture because I was afraid of somebody in this room that might have been doing it. seen other pictures along these lines, like when the government is issuing warnings not to put gasoline in plastic bags, that means either one of two things, right? Either you've lost your mind, or you might need to start thinking about putting gasoline in plastic bags. You might need to start thinking about doing. Seriously, these people remind me of a term that came to my attention a few years ago. The term prepper. You ever heard the term prepper? Not preppy. Like I heard that term when I was there, but prepper. A prepper is a person who takes extreme measures in planning for catastrophe or disaster, specifically as it relates to the end of the world, right? So this, I think I've shown you this picture before. This is an area nearly the size of Manhattan that lies in South Dakota's Black Hills. It's called Vivos X Point, and it's the largest survival community in the world. Each of the mounds that you see there is called an apocalypse shelter. It's an underground bunker that's designed to withstand a 500,000-pound internal blast. That specific location in South Dakota is at least 100 miles away from the nearest known military nuclear targets. In the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, Vivos said that its demand for bunkers grew exponentially, with inquiries and applications up over 1,000% from the previous year. While annual sales have increased by about 800%, the company refers to its underground hideouts as a backup plan for mankind. These people are prepared for any storm that may come, right? Except perhaps an earthquake. Now, if you go to their website, this is the front page. Where will you go with 3 days' notice, right? Presenting the doomsday scenario that we all have 3 days before the earth falls apart, and so where is it we're going to go, right? I don't know how we would get 3 days' notice. I think of the movie Armageddon, where they had X number of weeks before the meteor crashed into Earth, and oh, wouldn't you know, there's a meteor there that's about to crash into Earth. These people they prey upon fear. They're among the catastrophic possibilities they note on their website are these: what they call a prophetic asteroid, terrorism, World War III, economic collapse, an EMP attack, polar shift, missile attack, and something called Illuminati depopulation. I have no idea what that is. I looked at these shelters today. You can get one for about $55,000. What'd I do?
Nothing. Let's change my just
So you can get one of these for about $55,000, but they expanded to Indiana. And in Indiana, you can get one for $35,000. Thank you. Thank you. Which probably doesn't sound like a terrible idea to some of you. Well, the disasters that we are discussing today are not necessarily the Armageddon type, but they might feel that way when they hit us. I think that this last year has been one of the stormier seasons of my life for multiple reasons. And not all storms are Armageddon-type storms, but they might feel that way, right? They might feel that way here in our minds and here in our hearts. Everybody's got them. Few of them are predictable. Some of them are. One preacher I listen to frequently says that there is no one here for whom one phone call can't change their life in a moment. And that's true for all of us. Last week, one of our friend's daughters started choking and dry heaving, and she couldn't figure out why. And she was attending to her child and trying to get her to talk, and the kid couldn't talk, but eventually she was able
to utter that she had swallowed something small and round and metal. Immediately you think of a coin. And so she went and got a coin, and the girl was like, no, it's not a coin. And then it occurred to her that she had swallowed a battery. And that battery was literally burning a hole in her esophagus. They got her to the hospital about 2.5 hours after she had swallowed one of those small little, like watch batteries or something like that. And in fact, a hole was being burned into her esophagus. Life comes at you quick. And there are people in this room right now enduring storms that we may or may not know anything about. Behind the smiles and the handshakes are people who can't see a horizon, can't see a shore or a path forward. The clouds are that thick. And oftentimes these people don't even want us to know, as if there's some kind of some kind of value in keeping those things private, right? What I've found in my life is typically the longer those things remain private, the more daunting those storms become. Or maybe you're a person for who life is all sunny right now. And if that's you, man, I'm thrilled for you. Live it up, enjoy it, bask in it. It was just that way for the apostles on the day that we're studying today. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to them, let us go across to the other side. I want to begin this section by noting that the apostles are doing exactly what Jesus tells them to do. For all of chapter 4 and for half of the chapter before it, Jesus has been teaching, and now he tells the apostles to take a boat and go on to the other side. They do exactly what he says. They're going about it exactly how he told them to go to the place where he intends for them to reach. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was. And other boats were with him, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. Not only are they doing exactly what it is that Jesus has instructed, heading for the destination that Jesus has in mind, but he's with them. He's with them as they go where he told them to go in the manner in which he told them. He's in their boat, and there are other boats too. But the one in which they are traveling is the boat that Jesus is also in. And while obeying Jesus, while right in the middle of God's will, there arises a storm. It comes out of nowhere while they are obeying him, doing exactly what he said. What I think we should begin by saying is that it still storms right there in the middle of God's will. It still storms right in the middle of God's will, even if you're doing exactly what he told you to do and going exactly where he told you to go. Just because you're on the right path, just because you're faithful, just because you are pursuing God's glory with all you do, it's still going to storm from time to time. In fact, I'm convinced that God has no greater method of teaching us and no greater method of increasing our faith than in storms of life. And you know this, you don't need me to tell you this, because it's your experience in life. When I ask you the times that you grew the most, those weren't the happy times. When I ask you what emboldened your faith, what empowered your faith, you really began to grow and mature and learn. Those weren't the times when everything was hunky-dory. Those were the times when you were going through storms, when you were enduring trials, and some of the hardest moments of your life that you now find yourself on the other side of, and you look back and say, man, I realize now what the Lord was teaching me. Some people go decades in life and then get to a point where they're finally able to look back and say, man, I can see what God was doing for all those years. I had no idea what he was doing until I got here, and now I look back and see the grace that he had in bringing me through to the other side of those storms, of those trials. There are storms in my life that have come suddenly with no warning. There are storms in my life that I've brought upon myself. But in some fashion, I needed all of them. And I know that there are more yet to come. And just as they are unsettling in my life, they were unsettling for the apostles as well. This storm here will be the source of significant unsettling. Naturally, it's going to unsettle the seas. It was a storm over which there was no control. Can't control the wind, can't control the waves, can't control the rain. And when we encounter something we can't control, well, personally, it will begin to unsettle the apostles' emotions. In verse 40, Jesus asks them, why are you so afraid? Where I was fine just hours ago, I'm now experiencing anxiety or fear or panic at my inability to control this unexpected storm. In our living room a few years ago, we had on our coffee table this vase that had this, what's this stuff called? It's this grass. It's decorative brown grass is what it is. It's like, what's that stuff called? It's going to come to me in a minute. Somebody say it. Chuck? Yeah, I don't believe you. I don't believe you, Chuck. What? Yeah. I don't know. Anyways, it's sitting there, and there's a candle next to it that's not been lit. And I don't know why, but my wife was going to light the candle, but my daughter asked if she could light the candle. And so, in a moment of absent-mindedness, Ange was like, yeah, go light the candle. And when Aniston went to light the candle, the pampas grass is what it's called, and just thought of it. That stuff lit on fire, ablaze, just like that, right? Caught on fire, and Ange turns around and sees this thing on fire and just loses it. And she runs over and grabs this thing and starts running around the house. I mean, we've got a slider door right there, right? But she's running around and runs out the house finally, and this stuff falls on the ground and it's burning on the lanai floor. And I just walk out there and I just kind of stomp it out. And she's gotten the hose and she's just because she can't think because she's panicking because she doesn't know what to do. Right? She's lost control. A minute ago she was just fine. Right now the house is about to burn down. We're all going to die. And so she can't think about what she's got to do in that moment. Well, now, because our emotions are heightened and our mind is beginning to run in all kinds of directions, our beliefs are wavering. In the storms of my life, when suddenly something comes on me and I don't have control, I don't think logically. And when I don't think logically, the things that I am founded on, the foundation that I've always had, isn't the first thing that comes to mind, and I don't know what to do. My emotions are being affected. And so spiritually then, it will begin to unsettle the apostles' belief. This is often how storms work. Just so I don't throw my wife under the bus, not long ago, I wanted to replace the sprayer hose in my kitchen. This kind of stuff always happens to me. I swear, it always happens to me. So I go to replace this sprayer hose, not a big deal at all. I go to turn the water off underneath the sink, and when I turn the nozzle to turn off the water, that thing just breaks off in my hand, and water comes shooting out at me, just spraying everywhere. And what am I going to do? And I just totally lose my mind for a minute. I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm just standing there, looking at the water, what in the world am I going to do? And my wife yells, go shut the water off outside the house. And so I turn, I run outside, and I go to the side of the house, and fortunately, I know where the valve is, and I turn the nozzle off, and I call Jerry Martinez, and I'm like, come fix my house. And so I knew there was a water valve outside. I knew I should go turn it off, but in the moment, I was just paralyzed. I couldn't believe what had just happened. These kinds of things happen to me frequently, and our storms often occur in much the same manner. That you have yours, I have mine, and though they're different in nature, they're similar in experience. The unexpected occurs. Sudden financial troubles, an ominous medical report, something happens in your marriage, your child is enduring some difficulty, there's drama at work, But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. It sounds like there's one cushion, and Jesus has it. He's asleep on the cushion, and they wake him, and they say, hey, don't you care that we're dying, right? Like, they're a little dramatic. We are perishing here. Do you not care about this? This storm has caused a storm of emotion now that is causing a storm of theology. And where is Jesus during all this? He is asleep. Now, let's be real here. Who sleeps in a boat during a storm, okay? Who sleeps in a boat during a storm when the boat is filling up with water? I sleep in my bedroom during a storm just fine. I rather enjoy the sound. But in a boat, sometimes I wonder, this is pure speculation, I just wonder if Jesus was faking it. I just wonder, right? Who sleeps in a boat during a storm when the boat's filling up with water? I just wonder if Jesus is faking it, taking a peek every now and then to see what's going to happen, right? Peter's over there hyperventilating. Judas off doing stuff he's not supposed to be doing. Like their lives are falling apart, and Jesus is sleeping, so they go and they wake him up. They bring his attention to their storm. I think sometimes we try to bring other people's attention to our storm. People who have power, people who have a lot of money, people who have an expertise in that particular type of storm, and still yet to bring Jesus' attention to our storm. You say, well, why do I need to? He already knows about my storm. You're right. He already does. He knows about your storm. He knew about Abraham's storm when he was about to sacrifice Isaac. He knew about Joseph's storm when he found himself in prison. He knew about Moses' storm when he faced the grumbling of a nation. He knew about David's storm when Saul was trying to kill him. He knew about Job's storm when all of his life was falling apart. In all of these storms, he already knew it. So why do I need to bring his attention to it? Maybe he's waiting to see how we will respond. He got up. That's not right. He woke. He rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" On July 16th, 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr.'s single-engine plane crashed into the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, killing himself, his wife Carolyn, and his sister-in-law, all in their early 30s. All investigations into the cause of the crash point to a phenomenon we call spatial disorientation. Spatial disorientation is a term given to the condition that a pilot experiences when flying through a storm that is so dense he can't see the horizon or the ground, and he becomes disoriented. Points of reference that normally guide his senses disappear. His sensory perceptions become unreliable, and he no longer knows which way is up or down. That's why most planes are equipped with navigational instruments that are designed to inform pilots of the plane's altitude, its ground speed, and if a pilot enters into dark or cloudy conditions where his natural orientation, his senses become unreliable, he can, what they call, fly by the instruments. He can look at those instruments and know that no matter what his brain is telling him, these instruments are correct. Learning to place more confidence in a plane's instrument than in one's own senses, however, doesn't come naturally. It requires training. When our mind senses potential danger, especially mortal danger, and urgently commands bank right, while instruments on the dash indicate that we should bank left, it is very difficult to trust the instruments over our own minds. As one expert stated, reflecting on the Kennedy crash, you have to be well trained to disregard what your brain is saying and fly by the instruments. John F. Kennedy Jr. had not received this training. He was certified to fly in conditions where he could visually distinguish the ground from the sky. However, en route to Martha's Vineyard, he flew into a hazy fog at night. He experienced spatial disorientation. He trusted his perceptions that were guiding him. 3 days later, the Coast Guard located the remains of the plane and its young passengers on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. I have a choice in the storm. In the middle of the storm that has come on me, whether I brought it here, whether I knew it was coming, or whether it came upon me suddenly, I have a choice in the storm. I can trust my doubt-filled perception of reality, or I can trust the instruments of God's promises. I can have faith. I can trust what my heart says. I can trust what my mind says. Or I can trust the instruments that God has given me, the promises that He has given me, the word that He has given me. I have a choice in the storm. And when your perceptions tell you something different than God's promises, always, always, always trust God's promise over how you feel. Feelings aren't facts, some would say. The heart is deceptive above all things. You ever notice that the only thing that impresses Jesus ever is faith? It's the only thing that ever impresses Him. He's not impressed by presence. He's not impressed by knowledge. He's not impressed by humility. The thing that impresses Him is faith. When He really gets impressed, He's like, man, who touched me? Like who? What great faith you have. It's the only thing that ever impresses Him. 2 Corinthians 5 says, therefore, we are always confident, and we know that as long as we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we live by faith, not by sight. We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord, so we make it our goal to please Him, whether we are at home in the body or away from it. And so, in Ephesians 2:8, we read that we are saved by what? Grace through what? And this not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. What is the gift of God? And faith is the gift of God. We make it our goal, then, says 2 Corinthians, to please Him. That reminds me of Hebrews 11:6, and without faith, it is impossible to please God, right? The same faith that we are hopefully training ourselves in. You know, it is easy to assume that when I encounter a storm, I will be able to fall back on my training. But many of you know that the experience is unlike what you've imagined. It's emotional. It's disorienting. For the apostles, their focus becomes the problem, not the promise. And all too often, that is the case for us too. For the apostles, their focus had become the problem and not His promise. Storms are meant to deepen your faith. They are unavoidable because you can't control when they come, how they come, or how long they stay. What if during this stormy season of my life, what if this storm, dreadful as it might be, is meant to shake me into a greater faith in Jesus? And I can only long for a time when I get on the other side of it and look back and say, man, I know exactly what He was doing. I can't see it right now. My senses don't make sense right now. My heart and mind tell me that this is not where God wants me to be. But man, I long to be on the other side in a place where I can look back and say, man, that totally makes sense what God was doing all that time. He was just longing for me to make it to this point. Jesus challenges the apostles based on their own faith. And in verse 41, it says that they were terrified. And they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." When they were in the storm, they were afraid. When they saw who they were dealing with, they became terrified. When you understand who you're dealing with, I think it puts your fears in perspective. William Cowper was a man who lived a life beset by storms and tragedy. His mother died when he was 6. He had very little relationship with his father. He struggled with mental illness and depression for many years, and finally one bleak morning he tried to end his life by taking poison. But the attempt at suicide failed. He then took a taxi down to the Thames River, intending to throw himself from the bridge. But as he writes later on, he was, quote, strangely restrained. The next morning, he fell upon a sharp knife, but the blade broke. He tried later to hang himself, but he was found and taken down unconscious, but still alive. Sometime later, years later, he took up a Bible. He began to read the book of Romans, and he turned to faith. The God of the storms had pursued him unto the end and won his heart. And after a rich life of Christian experiences, William Cowper sat down, and looking back on his life, he wrote and recorded a hymn. It's number 26 in your songbooks. Do we have it on the screen? It's called "God Moves in a Mysterious Way." You may not know it very well, but we're going to sing it, and I'd like you to pay attention to the words as we do. I don't have a pitch pipe, so we'll do the best we can. God moves in a mysterious way, His wonders to perform. He plants His footsteps in the sea, and rides upon the storm. He bid unfathomable minds of never-failing skill. He treasures up His bright designs and works His gracious will. Ye fearful saints, stretch courage, take the clouds ye so much dread, are big with mercy and shall reign in blessings on your head. His purposes will guide them fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Like unbelief is sure to bear, and scant His work in vain. God is His own interpreter, and He will and what are Jesus' storms? We've not said anything of those. His storms from Gethsemane to Golgotha were far worse than anything that you and I will ever know, and He entered them willingly for us so that we would be rescued from all of ours, particularly the ultimate storm of God's wrath against our sin. That's why He came. His storm crushed Him so that our storms would become redemptive for us. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet He did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. So let's end where we began. In the first verse of this passage in Mark, Jesus says, "Let us go over to the other side." We need to go from here to there. Each of us is going over to the other side. We are moving from one place to another in so many ways. Not just are we moving there physically, but we are moving there mentally. We are moving there emotionally. We are moving there familially. We are moving there theologically. We are moving from one side to the other in so many ways. And as Christ followers, we should be moving from one side to the other, from glory to glory, says 2 Corinthians 3, by pursuing Christ likeness. There is no guarantee that getting from here to the other side is going to be smooth sailing. Getting from who you are to who God wants you to be can be dangerous, and it's going to be stormy. But what happens to me does not have to happen in me. What happens to me does not have to happen in me. And it occurs to me that through all my storms and through all of yours, we're still here. He has sustained us through them all. So let go, my soul, and trust in Him. The waves and the wind still know His name. The waves and the wind of earth. The waves and the wind of your lives.